Here we go. The button's pushed.
The button's pushed and we're waiting for the signal that we're recording. Okay, it seems that we're recording. It doesn't look as normal, but however, I'm so happy to talk to Michelle MacDonald again today, attorney, candidate for the Minnesota Supreme Court. Her website is familyinnocence.com, and today she's here with us to talk about Sandra Grazzini-Rucki and the world's last custody trial. That is doesn't trip exactly off my tongue, but on April 19th, 2013, two of the Rucki children ran away from home in the middle of a custody battle, which would soon make international headlines. And I remember seeing those where I was living at the time. For 2 years, the media all but ignored the story, even as the two missing girls' faces quietly made their way onto the backs of course, milk cartons. Then exactly 2 years later, everything changed, and the Rucki divorce became a tabloid story covered breathlessly by the Minneapolis Star and Tribune and a segment on ABC's 2020. While the media focused on the salacious aspects of the case, they all but ignored the corruption and abuse. Now comes the inside story and the real story. It's a story of domestic abuse, court cover-up, and a compliant media covering up for everyone. A lawyer is forced to represent her client while under arrest. A flight attendant and mother of 5 with no criminal record is forced to share a cell with a convicted murderer just off death row. And a violent and dangerous man is never held accountable and now has total control over his 5 children. I would like to introduce Michelle MacDonald. And ma'am, please tell us about your book. It's available on Amazon.com as a digital download and also as in print form. Please tell us a little bit about this case, Michelle.
Well, thank you, Wes. First of all, thank you for trying to pronounce Sandra's last name correctly. Everybody gets it wrong. You did a pretty good job there. And it's called Sandra Grazzini-Rucki and the world's last custody trial. And I call it that because on September 11th, we're going back to 2013. Wow, I can't even believe it's been 7 years. I handled what I believe will be the example of why family court needs to go. And that's why I call it the world's last custody trial. My co-writer, Michael Volpe, wanted to call it something else. And he now understands why I named it that, because it's a symbol of how corrupted the family court has become and how unnecessary family court is in Minnesota and around the country.
Is family court largely an administrative function at this point? And since we're in COVID-19 lockdown still since last March, it's almost a year. Is it somewhat of a redundant thing to have in existence? Is it beneficial just to functionaries and people who are not missing a paycheck at all, by the way, right?
Right. Well, we need to go back to the United States Supreme Court jurisprudence that courts are not to enter the realm of family. And that jurisprudence has been available since before I was born. What has developed is, and I have to blame the lawyers, is that it's become litigating families has become one of the more lucrative not even just for the lawyers, for the entire system, one of the more lucrative aspects of our government.
Is it especially so in Minnesota, where family court law largely favors the mother and her word is taken? I mean, maybe we should talk more specifically
Mhm.
about the case, but we
Mhm.
know that divorce court in Minnesota is a terrible place for men to find
Mhm.
themselves.
Mhm.
But for all parties, it's a massive waste of money, isn't it?
Mhm. Well, it's not a waste of money for our government. We what I learned is, and I've tried to let people know this, because remember, I've been practicing law since the 1980s, so it wasn't so horrible when I came to Minnesota and started practicing almost unexpectedly in the family law arena. Originally, and I just got a Christmas card from her. One of my best friends from law school, she fell into family law, which is, by the way, not family law, it's anti-family law. Think about it. Think about it. That there's a book of laws as thick as a phone book in Minnesota that don't even apply to you unless you're breaking up, or unless you have a child that is you're not married and you have a child together. Think about that. It's anti-family law, and we've been fooled and tricked into thinking that we actually have to have laws regulating our families only when they're breaking up.
Is this one of the reasons that perhaps people are, well, I mean, particularly men are walking away from marriage as a life option generally in Minnesota, or definitely asking for prenuptial agreements? But I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on YouTube, but am I onto something there in thinking that the high levels of divorce rates in the US might be one of the reasons that fewer men are getting married and committing?
Well, you're doing exactly what our third branch in our government wants us to believe. They want to make it a man issue, a woman issue, a father issue, a mother issue, and pit parents against one another. To detract from what our government is doing to our families. So it is not, and I know this because I've been representing for years mothers, fathers, children, men, women. It is not a gender issue. It is not about, oh, father's rights or mother's rights. The system treats parents indiscriminately, and it's an anti-family situation, and it's, I've learned it's because there's lots of money involved.
What could be the approximate level of money that's involved that's being spent on litigation of family issues? And in this particular case, let's get on to the particulars of this case at some point, but how much money are we talking about in Minnesota?
Well, this particular case, I took pro bono. So, but again, I still, in my pro bono cases, what I learned is you keep track of your time and your fees, because I learned that when you do something pro bono and you ask the court to have the other side pay your fees, if you've done it for free, you have no fees. So part of what I've learned is you have to at least be generating fees that you don't expect to ever be paid by your client in these situations. But this case, all in all, was $400,000, and those are just the fees I kept track of that would have been due and payable to me if I had been not doing it pro bono for a woman who, when I met her, was homeless. She was kidless. She did have a job at the time, fortunately, a job she had had for 30 years. But she had 5 things that she understood were going to happen to her, and I didn't believe that they would happen to her. That she would be the last one was be dead. So she ended up being in jail, which was, I think, the 4th item. She ended up kidless, homeless, and penniless.
And,
when I met her,
yeah,
she was all of that.
Kidless, homeless, and penniless. Mm-hmm. She was completely destroyed. I mean, by this mm-hmm. process, this ongoing process. Are we? He was awarded. So the father was awarded custody of the mm-hmm. children. The mm-hmm. story goes, right? But
it wasn't that way. You mentioned earlier in the program, Family Innocence, which developed with a calling that I had in March of 2011. So it was a few years before I met Sandra, to abolish court for families altogether. And it was a spiritual calling. I was working on a case. It was the case of Benedictus Ombuna. He was a Black man from Kenya, Africa, who I'm actually in the office where I met with him the first time. I have I guess you could call it, my office can have walk-ins. It's on South Robert Street, and we have a sign out front so people can just walk in if they need legal help, and we help them if we can. But he walked into this office with what I thought was a easily resolvable problem. He went to the bus stop one day and his son was gone. And he came in here, and basically what I learned was his son's mother was deceased. So what had happened was, so you're like, who's fighting this? So what had happened was there was a judge, a guardian ad litem, and a relative who didn't have standing by law, who went into a chambers in court with no service of papers, no underlying court action, and actually the judge signed an order that someone else would have custody. And because the order didn't have any parenting time for him, he didn't get any. So it was a very I thought, family court doesn't do this. Juvenile court might do it, take your kids away instantly if there's abuse, but there was no abuse. So we had to actually, this is what I learned, we had to actually investigate his due process. That's what was happening to people all over Minnesota. They would wake up, let's say, and this is a true example, in a hospital without their child, and have to investigate, where's my child? Where's the paperwork? What happened? And so I started to realize that children were disappearing from parents in this manner without any abuse. So and the family court was doing it. not
The family
just
court
juvenile
is
court.
taking children away from parents, and then there's a financial incentive for bringing them into the system and removing them from parents' custody. Is that what's going on?
It's really hard to put. It isn't the attorneys that have the financial incentive, so to speak, but there is a financial incentive. I think I mentioned and want to put out there that our Minnesota Department of Human Services that now handles child protection matters, also handles child support matters, it handles adult protection, it handles foster care. And this was blurry to me at the time. We're talking back in when I think Benedictus Ombuna first walked into my office. I think it was 2008. So I was awakened by his case. I didn't have I was like, this can't even be. And I learned that it was happening, that the Minnesota Department of Human Services budget just for 1 year is $17.5 billion. So that was on the front page of the newspaper just this past maybe year and a half.
Yeah.
And so I investigated, and I feel like that is why children are being taken away, because if somebody was going to, you have to almost create cases, right?
Right.
So you actually have to create a network of social workers across the state that their job is to presumably protect children. And there's not as many children as you'd think that need protection. So as the system developed into a child can never endure any type of what we might call abuse, a spanking, for instance, we can just take them away and do what we want, or not take them away. It's just random, it's arbitrary, and that's what I learned, that the rule followers, which I am, we got a book of rules, and I'm trying to sort them out, and what I came to learn is that our entire Minnesota Family Court statute, and I'll say statutes, it's 518, is unconstitutional. And I can show you the book. I usually just it's like a phone book, and it's unconstitutional because it actually allows for and it allows for termination of parental rights. And my clients used to tell me this, well, my rights have been terminated. I'm like, no, they haven't. Parenting time has just been reserved, or the child's just been taken away, and we'll get them back. But what I came to realize is that instant, the instant severing of a relationship between mother and child, or father and child, is a termination. It's not, you can't have a temporary termination. And I came to realize that all of these orders that are evolving, not necessarily from the statutes, but from the court culture that we have, the attorney culture, that is they're unconstitutional because they're injunctions. They're telling parents to do this, do that. You can only see your kids at this certain time. And what I learned, and because I'm an attorney, I'm trying to follow these rules and these laws and these statutes, is that that is not the way we are intended to operate as families. We're not intended to be robots. And I've been able to verbalize it more and more, because again, it's at first it was just a blur to me. It was just like, well, this can't really be happening. And then I'd see it happening over and over and over again. And I still get calls. I got a call yesterday from on behalf of a mother. So what we do is we get married or we don't get married. We have children, and we run our families. I mean, we have a home, we have an apartment, we support our children with food and love and a roof over their heads, and we have jobs, and we do our best to do the right thing. And it's not until the family court, I'll say, captures us, and not until a lawsuit occurs. In other words, you're served papers, and now you don't even have to be served papers, by the way, but you served papers. I told you Benedictus wasn't served any papers. And suddenly the jurisdiction of the courts and that branch of government enters your home and tells you how much money you need to make. They have a thing called imputed income. Well, you might not make as much money as the average lawyer or the average realtor, but they're going to impute income to you to assess child support. And there's going to be a bill that you get every month relating to your children. They tell you
that money goes to the Department of Health and Human Services, and then it's administered by them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it used to not be that way. Years ago, you would not have income withholding unless you were
derelict in duty.
Well, not even derelict. You could be derelict and have good reason. See, that would be, but that's not the case anymore. You're derelict, and that's it. You didn't pay your child support, and there was one state that was actually administering child support where if you were late, you'd be called into court right away. Like within 5 days, you'd be called into court. So derelict came to mean that you didn't pay, not that you didn't have the money to pay. It used to be that if somebody was in contempt, that meant that they had all kinds of money, and they just, were just seriously just saying, you know what, I'm just not paying. That's called contempt of court, right? When you're asked to do something and you totally disregard it, and you're just not going to do it, even though you have all the resources to pay. Well, it came to be that a deadbeat was just somebody who didn't pay one payment. And they might have had really good reason not to pay, like they lost their job. Or maybe they paid the mother or the father directly, and that doesn't count. It just got to be so crazy that we all needed to be running our families as if we were robots. And I fault the attorneys. And I also fault the judges, because what happened is that attorneys started to, and I was one of them. I admit, I remember doing when I first got involved in family court, we just have I would say reasonable they called it visitation, reasonable visitation, and people would just operate as they may with and be reasonable about things, right? But as it turned out, I remember thinking, I put together a seminar on 1,001 ways to write a visitation order. And that's when we started to have, call it weekends, and have certain times, and then have certain holidays. And then it became, the schools were not even getting involved. They would not have separate meetings with the parents. See, schools were just, then the attorneys started to get the schools involved. Then the schools became places where when the children were in school, neither parent could go there unless it was their parenting time. Then they might be able to, and it got more infected and more corrupted. To people started to think, wow, if I can get more time in an order, this is a good thing. And instead of yielding to the other parent, it's you cannot. So it became family regulation. So these laws are regulating families only if they're breaking up, by the way, or only if they're unmarried. We have court orders regulating our families. Our entire family life is honed down to a few pages of sheets of paper signed by a judge. And we want that paper to be, oh my gosh, I want joint custody because that paper is going to make a big difference. And that's where the freedoms were taken away. And it was unwittingly and unknowingly by the parents themselves, who were not undergoing any type of abuse, but just wanted their children 100%. We all want our children 100%, right? If we love them and want to be with them. And there was another thing. No fault divorce came into play. And so we can't hear about fault. We can't hear about fault. So it's like, okay, there was always fault. Somebody was at fault. Something happened. So that started to be suppressed. And then all of a sudden you could talk about fault. It's just a unbelievable, a remarkable, if you open your eyes, these orders, 5.7 million orders a year are regulating our families. And then you'd have an order that says findings of fact, conclusions of law, order for judgment and judgment. And look at those, because there are no conclusions of law in them. The conclusions of law just go right to the orders. So
Michelle, sorry. So Michelle, the conclusions of law go right to the orders. And all of these things are somewhat in collusion with the facts as the Minnesota judges administer them. So it seems to be, we have a system that is intent on protecting itself and preserving itself and keeping everything in stasis, so that this bureaucracy of family court will be, it's more essential that the bureaucracy of the family court continue to exist than the family unit, right? And the end result is that people may not wish to participate in any of this and walk away. So is the ends of this seems to be the destruction of the family itself, rather than any mediation or working things out between parties. I don't know. Am I getting
the
that?
ends of this is those 5.7 million families are being regulated by a court order. Think about that. Their family life, they have to look to a court order. Imagine if and then what started to happen is, it didn't end when the child was 18. It used to be that once you'd be done with your divorce matter, you would get a court order and jurisdiction would be done. The court had no jurisdiction anymore. And if you wanted to get more court jurisdiction, you had to actually serve again, personally serve, find them, have a new type of a case. And the attorney stopped doing that. I can remember years ago an attorney calling me like, you know, they didn't even serve. They didn't even personally serve. And the rules say this. And I'd be like, yeah, that's our family court. The attorneys just made it easier. Now we can just do motions. We can walk into court at any time, whether our kids are adults or not. It's very, very,
Michelle,
very, very abusive, and it's what we have come to know as our family court culture. And it can end in an instant.
so maybe the message here is that we need to stay on top of this, because if we want families in Minnesota at all, they're going to have to be environments where people feel nurtured and want to continue in those family relationships. And if a party's decided to walk away, make it easier for them to do so, or mediate to get those differences resolved, or somehow try to strike a balance. But this case that is featured in your book, Sandra Grazzini-Rucki and the world-class custody trial, is a case that is almost a metaphor, if you will, for parenthood in Minnesota generally. And maybe we should be sympathetic. I wish we could revisit some of the things we've said, but at this point, let's move this into a second session if we're going to continue, because I think we've reached sort of a limit at this point. And let's call it part 2 if we reconvene, so to speak. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for being with us. And you can find her book on Amazon.com. Thank you.
Yes, Sandra Grazzini-Rucki and the World's Last Custody Trial. And yeah, you can find it on Amazon.com. And we will reconvene. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Wes.
Me too. We'll be looking forward to those orders.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.